Hey everyone, Nat Richards from Techs on the Move here, and this short video is about getting around in Oz. So what do I mean by that? It could be any number of things. I get asked questions all the time as a consultant chatting with people in other parts of the world about how they're going to get around when they get to Australia. And of course, a lot of that does focus on driving. So whether that be motorbikes, cars, sometimes even trucks, people want to know how their licenses relate to driving in Australia, how you go about getting a car, what insurance is like. There's a lot to consider there, but here's a couple of really short pointers. So if you're driving internationally on a license in your home country that is complete or unrestricted, so you're not on any sort of provisional license, you should be able to come to Australia and drive for at the very least a period of 3 months without any issues, which is the same length as a regular tourist visa for those that come here on that visa, because we want people to be able to rent a car and get around while they're here. Above and beyond that, how much longer you might be allowed to drive in Australia on the license that you hold from another country does depend on which state in Australia you've come to. So each of the different states of Australia, like New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia, Victoria, whatever it might be, they've all got their own rules around which license will be required for people if you have not come from that particular state or from Australia in general. Most states, though, as a rule of thumb, will still allow someone here on a temporary visa, like say the 482 or TSS visa, to drive in Australia on the license that they had from overseas until that thing runs out or until they become a permanent resident. So that's good news. Otherwise, you may have to consider getting an Australian license if your employer requests that you do, if driving cars is part of your job, which of course for most people in the motor trade, that's going to happen. So if you do have to get an Aussie license, it's a pretty straightforward process. Our road system is a relatively easy one. It does not require a full-blown process of having to prove you can drive again like you did when you were a kid. It instead is only a theory-based exam, so pretty much done on a touch screen in an official office here in Australia, and the cost is not prohibitive. So good news all around on that front. Buying a car, pretty straightforward process. So of course, tons and tons of choice down here. You may find compared to say the United Kingdom that the price of any given car out there is probably a little bit higher than what you might expect at home. There's not as much choice as there is out there on the open market, but still lots available, of course. One of the key differences to remember though is that the registration of a vehicle in Australia, so your ability to drive that on a public road prepaid, if you like, through the local government, is actually attached to the car. So in a UK context, something like road tax, we would call it registration, which is still given after an actual inspection of the car is done, or MOT in British standard. This is something that sticks with the car. So you could have two exact same cars, one with 1 month worth of registration, one with 11 months, and the one with 11 months, of course, will be worth more to purchase because you've got longer to use that car before you have to worry about doing something with it officially. Insurances, generally speaking, are quite low in Australia, so whilst the cost of buying a car might be a little elevated compared to where you've come from, the cost of insuring that car is likely to be a hell of a lot less, even if you're in a major city. One important thing that I note to anyone coming over is try not to get sucked into the trap of buying a car that's too expensive. There's not really any need for it. It's, I think, a much better option to buy something cheap and cheerful, especially if you're a mechanic, because you can fix it yourself if something goes wrong. And then whilst you may not like the hassle, you've not gone out of your way and spent a ton of cash on that either, because it can become a bit of an anchor whilst you're still trying to get up to speed and on your feet in a brand new country. The last thing you need is fancy leather seats just cause. So something cheap and cheerful, much better way to go. Aside from that, how else might you get around? Public transport, of course, will vary depending on which part of Australia you're going to. Big cities will commonly have a pretty well-developed network, some better than others. To be fair, you'd have to say that Melbourne, on balance, does have the best public transport system that I've ever experienced as an Australian. In particular, their tram network is fantastic. Sydney is doing their best to catch up with some investments in light rail, but ultimately it's still not at the standard that we've come to know and love out of Melbourne. Sydney, of course, is also a little bit harder to get around because of all the waterways everywhere, which tends to complicate things. Otherwise, though, most other cities pretty easy to get around, and even something like a bus network is all electronically carded these days. So the system is fairly modern and quite clean and pretty user friendly once you come up to terms with it. Favourite way for me to get around, of course, is bike. I am a bit of a bike rider at heart, and of course, with our Australian weather, riding a bike to get around is a really practical way of even getting to work on weekends, seeing the sights, doing whatever you got to do. Because you're very unlikely to get wet very often. If anything, it's more a case of having to deal with the sweat. But that's not such a bad thing if you're coming to Australia to enjoy that wonderful outdoor lifestyle. Above and beyond that, getting around, if you're lucky enough to land in a spot like Sydney and incorporate some of those waterways into your commute, there's a few better ways to get to work than doing it on the harbour. And a nice walk, of course, in this beautiful Aussie climate of ours is pretty common stuff for people getting about as well. So that's a bit of a summary. Hopefully the car stuff in particular helped, because those questions do come up quite often. If you've got a specific question that you'd like to ask, please don't hesitate. You can reach me directly at nat.richards@techsonthemove.com.au, or of course leave some comments wherever you're seeing this and we will get back to you. Thank you.